So don't forget to comment throughout the show. The show's about to get started, so grab yourself 2 hearty buckets of popcorn and get ready to have a discussion about how to use your creative talents to sell. Now it's time for a message from today's sponsor. Wow, I can sell my B2B SaaS product anywhere in the world. Maybe I should start selling in Europe.
Not so fast, Jimmy. Have you ever run a European marketing campaign before?
No? Gosh, I guess not.
Can you write fluently in multiple languages?
No, just the one.
Do you know anything about regulations in Europe?
Well, maybe I could just have my team bullshit their way through it.
Sound familiar? Hello, my name is Dr. Funkenstein. You know, when I need medical advice, I ask a doctor, but when I need SEO advice, I ask Flying Cat Marketing. Flying Cat is the world leader in customized local SEO and marketing campaigns. They have a team of native language marketing experts spanning across 15 different countries to build fully local campaigns to create and capture demand and increase organic search conversions for your business.
Wow, Dr. Funkenstein. I reached out to Flying Cat just like you said, and they were super easy to work with. How can I ever repay you?
Don't worry, Jimmy. I'll be reaching out to you for a personal favor very soon.
What?
Don't ask your doctor if SEO is right for your business. Get started with your free consultation at flyingcatmarketing.com.
Live from Chicago, it's Chris Sells His Soul. I'm your host, Chris Bogue. Thank you, everybody. I'm your host, Chris Bogue. This is my live show where I have conversations with cool people who will help you work more creatively. Today, my guest is Sarah Brazier. Sarah, welcome to the show. Please say hi to the audience and let them know where they can find you.
Hey, audience. I'm Sarah Brazier, and you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty sure it's linkedin.com/SJBrazier. That's what I think it is, but just look up my name and you'll find me.
Yeah, if you are watching this live right now, you can see there's a QR code on the screen. Go ahead and connect with Sarah Brazier on LinkedIn. Super awesome content creator and sales mind. We're going to be talking with her today all about how to speak like a champion. We're going to be talking about the highs and lows of competitive speech and what it can teach us about selling. But first, you're probably wondering who I am. So my name is Chris Bogue. I am your host, and I am an entrepreneur and video sales coach. So I coach people to do sales, specifically sales on video. So I have a course that I sell. I do consulting and corporate training. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. Just go to Chris Bogue. You can check me out there and ring my bell, okay? Hit the connect button. I'm friendly. We can be friends. You can hit the bell to get notifications of new content as it comes out. And before we get to today's episode, we're brought to you today by Flying Cat. So Flying Cat is a premier content creation and marketing agency. They specialize in international SEO and content creation that helps B2B SaaS companies build and execute organic growth strategies. So we're going to be hearing about them later on in the middle of the show. But before we do that, we want to hear from you. So if you are watching us live, if you are in the audience here, jump on into the comments. All right? We do not know you're here unless you leave a comment. So let us know if you do sales. Let us know if you ever did speech team or debate. If you have any questions for Sarah and I about sales, about speech, about LinkedIn, about public speaking, anything you want, drop them in the comments and we will do our best to answer all the questions before the end of the show. So without further ado, let's get this started.
Let's get this started.
Sarah, I'm going to start with what should be an easy question. What is Speech Team?
Speech Team is a group of kids, usually high school students, but they can be middle schoolers as well, who get together, or adults. There's college speech, but they get together and they have 10-minute long memorized speeches of varying topics. They could be acting speeches, they could be informative, they could be persuasive, but they get together and they do competitions every weekend, all school year. And if you do really well, you get number 1 in your round. And if you do really bad, you get number 6 in your round. And you just compete until they find the top 6 people, bracket style. And then you either win a trophy or you don't.
Yeah.
That's speech.
It's competitive talking. So it's one of those things where when you're growing up, speech and performance and theater and art, it's all designed to have fun and to express yourself. And speech team is, for me, it was one of the first experiences where it was a creative endeavor where adults were like, oh, we're going to rank you and let you know who's the best and who's the worst. And it's kind of a trip. It kind of blows your mind when you have people tell you that your speech is not good enough, but it also forces you to improve. So this conversation today is all about basically what you and I learned. We'll go a little bit into like what it was like for us being in speech team, and then we are both people who do sales in the world of B2B SaaS technology. So companies out there selling tech products to each other. You have to do a lot of spoken presentations for that. And actually having some speech experience under your belt helps a lot. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, you can go first and tell us what events you did and what events those were like. And I'll tell you a little bit about the events that I did, because we were in different states, right? I was in Illinois speech team kid. I did high school speech. I did a little bit of college speech. What was your speech career like, Sarah?
Yeah, so I started speech and debate when I was a freshman in high school. My older sister, who's 5 years older than me, was a state champion in dramatic interpretation. And I said, I want to do that. So in high school, I did humorous interpretation and I did dramatic interpretation and a little bit of duo. And humorous interpretation is a funny piece where you play lots of different characters. So it's kind of like watching one of your skits, Chris, except you don't have all of the props. You have to pantomime everything. And it goes really, really fast. Dramatic interpretation is usually a sad story and it's typically a monologue, although sometimes you play multiple characters. So it's like sad Chris Bogue skits. And then duo interpretation.
There's a lot of those.
Yeah. And then duo is basically what our skit was that we made together, where there's 2 people who stand next to each other. They can play just one character or they can play 2. And the rules in duo are that you can't look at each other and you can't touch each other. Why those rules exist, no one really knows. But those are the rules. So you have to be really creative about how you move around the space that you're in. And so I did that in high school. And then in college, I did all of those events, except humorous interpretation doesn't exist in college. And then I did a few more, which were prose interpretation. So instead of a work of drama, it's some kind of short story or written literature. That's not a play. I did poetry interpretation, same idea, but poems. I did program of oral interpretation, which is prose, poetry, drama, and any kind of additional literature. So you could take like news articles, for example, that are around a really specific topic, and you're making a persuasive argument through performance. I did informative speaking. I did rhetorical criticism. Informative speaking is kind of obvious. Rhetorical criticism is where you critique a piece of communication and you analyze how effective it was. And I think that's all of them.
A lot of them, yeah, you did a lot. I did a little bit of college speech. College speech, you can do like a million events. In high school, they only let us do 2. Illinois has...
They only let you do 1 at a time.
Oh,
you can only, so you have to sit through the same pieces all the time.
Yeah, you got to be double entered in Illinois, and we have different events. So we actually had, instead of duo, we had humorous duet acting and dramatic duet acting, and you were actually allowed to use a table and 2 chairs and try to like act it out like it's an actual scene. You actually could touch each other. Students did. It was oftentimes you would fight and dance and kiss and hug and do all sorts of, dramatic theatrical type things. And
then there was 16-year-old 16-year-old you thought was edgy. That's what you did.
Or what your speech coach
pushing boundaries.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit. I also did an event called Original Comedy, if you can believe it. And Original Comedy is an 8-minute original piece where you have to write it all yourself, and then you have to perform all the characters and all the voices yourself. So I discovered that I had a knack for that. I kept with it. Later on in life, I did a lot of sketch comedy. I do a lot of sketch comedy now. And it is funny that I just kind of figured out a way to continue doing speech team stuff as an adult. So I'm going to say right now, so the audience, if you've never been part of this world, if you've never been to a speech team competition, you might have listened to what Sarah said. She's like, oh, I did competitive prose reading. And you sit there and think to yourself, okay, so you're watching, a room full of 17-year-old kids read a short story and ranking them. How do you rank who's the best short storyteller? What is the criteria that we're supposed to use for that?
That's a very good question. And I actually worked at the National Speech and Debate Association. That's how much of a speech geek I am. And I helped the curriculum director design the ballots and the instructions for a new judge on how they should judge those things. So we used the modes of persuasion. So ethos, logos, pathos. So how does it make sense? Is it logical? Does it have a strong argument? Is the person believable? Do you like them? And that's sort of how we constructed it. So if you're looking at one of the interpretation events, there's an intro portion where the student is not in character and they explain why they chose the piece and why they think it matters. And this becomes more important in college, but high school speech is leaning in this direction as well. So you want to have some kind of justification for why the piece is relevant and what you think the author is saying. And then from there, the judge can decide if the cutting makes sense with the argument. And a cutting is, you can't do an hour-long play. You have to cut it down to 10 minutes. So you're literally just like going through with a highlighter and just highlighting the small pieces of the play until it's like very short, 10 minutes long.
Massacring it, some might say, but
yeah, you can completely change the ending if you want. It's allowed in the rules.
And we did.
What's his face? Simon, the really famous playwright. He's like written like a ton of stuff on Broadway, like The Odd Couple. What's that guy's name?
Oh God.
You know who it is, but I can't think of his name.
Neil Simon. Neil
Simon is like totally anti-speech, and he even has like disclaimers in his plays now, like you can't use this for speech. Because the kids would just destroy his like hard written works of art into 10-minute segments. I think kids still do it anyway because it's educational. It doesn't break copyright laws.
Let's talk about. Okay, so this is kind of what I'm getting at. The rules here are that the rules are meant to be broken, and you go through this progression. At least I went through this progression in speech team, and a lot of people I know like. You walk in there knowing nothing, right? You walk, nothing of this extracurricular activity or the judges or the coaches from your other schools and what the expectations are. You don't know what it is. So you go in there, you make up your own speech, or you read a speech, you try to do it as well as you can. And usually you fail right away. You fall flat on your face. The judges hate you. And you go through this progression where you realize you're not as great as you thought. You don't even know how to talk coherently. You're mumbling. You're not articulating your words well. You speed through everything. And the judge is like, I can't understand what this kid is saying, So then you go through this period of time where you learn. You learn what it's supposed to be. You learn about these three, pillars that Sarah Brazier and the National Speech and Debate Association put together of what supposedly you're being judged on. And then when you get a little deeper in a competition, you learn that sometimes that doesn't matter at all. Somebody's going to come in and break all the rules. They're going to throw all those rules out there, or they're going to do something outrageous, or they're going to do something shocking, or they're going to do something offensive or whatever, and it's going to win.
I can give you an example of that in speech.
Please do.
I think it was like 2008, there was a kid who got up on stage and did a humorous interpretation. And as you know, humorous interpretation is very snappy. Everybody's got really clean pops, so they're transitioning from one character to the other very cleanly, and they're very distinct and different. Their pantomime is super accurate. You can almost forget that they're not actually holding anything. And this kid got up on stage and he did a performance called Brussels Sprouts. And it was just a child who was being told he had to eat his Brussels sprouts at dinner. And he's got 5 Brussels sprouts and he gets rid of them in 5 different ways. And the popping was terrible. There was almost no lines in the script. It was almost all just him making funny sound effects. So there wasn't a very coherent or interesting plot. There was no way that you could make an interesting argument around what it meant to society and why it was important. And he got second place in nationals. It was the funniest thing I saw on stage all day, and I thought he was robbed and he should have won.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's what happens, and this is something that I have noticed about the world. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter if you're at work. It doesn't matter if you're in politics doing like international diplomacy. There is a set of norms and expectations that an audience expects. And there's always going to be an occasion where you win by breaking the rules.
But what I think is really important, and you can't skip over, is that you have to have the progression of, I don't know the rules, I don't know what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. I learn the rules and I understand what works and why it works, and why the people who win typically do A, B, and C things. And then I can make intentional choices around what rules I'm going to break, or why I don't care, and why I think that's a dumb rule to begin with. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, then a lot of times you're executing against the audience's expectations, but they are delighted by it, instead of going, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah. Well, because everybody gets used to the same patterns over and over and over again. And I always compare. We both do sales here too. And there's people, I think, people who don't do sales don't realize what it is. And they don't realize that most of the time you're not persuading anybody. It's not the job of sales is to persuade. And I learned something from speech team. So anybody who's ever done speech team at a high level has advanced to a final round. And in a final round, you have multiple judges. And anybody who's ever done speech team for a long enough time has made it to a final round where they get a score of 1, 3, 6. 3 different judges. One thought you were the best in the room. One thought you were somewhere in the middle. One thought you were literally the worst performer on the stage. They all watched the same performance. It is just a matter of opinion. And, in sales, you're calling, you're emailing, you're doing all these things, all these very repetitive types of outreach. But when you actually have a deal in the pipeline, when you actually have to, you have somebody who's interested in buying from you, you have to put together a presentation. You have to run them through a presentation. And it is like the scene in the movie where the main character has to win the day by delivering a hell of a rousing speech. And in that moment, you have to be completely honed in on your audience. And, it's different in sales, because in speech team, you're not allowed to talk to the audience. You're not allowed to break the fourth wall and start conversing with the audience. But in sales, you are. In sales, you're supposed to be talking to them throughout, so you can be gathering information about what's important to them. And you can use that to affect your audience. But I guess this is a really long-winded way of saying that whatever the hell the rules are supposed to be, the only rule is win with the audience you have.
Yes. I think going back to the rules you want to break concept is, I think if you go in there and you're breaking every single rule possible and you don't know why you're doing it, you end up orchestrating chaos, which isn't very fun for your audience. But if you're really strategic about it, you can you can put them on edge where they have to pay a little bit more attention, or they can have that pattern disrupt we talk about all the time in sales, and then they lean in to the performance. So in speech and debate, for example, in high school, I did a piece my senior year where the teaser, which is like the first 30 seconds to 1 minute and 30 seconds before you do your introduction as yourself, I would pretend that I forgot my speech. So I get up there, I'd act really confident, I'd start, I would do everyone has seen someone forget their speech in speech and debate. So I would do everything that the kids do, make my face go red, start hyperventilating, then go look at the judge and say, I forgot my speech. I think I have a copy in my bag. And then I walk right back to my desk and I stand in front of it for a second. And I go, you know what? I think I'll just talk to you. And then I'd jump right back fully into like the character. And then it would be this big fake out. So all the time judges would stop their stopwatch because you're timed. And they go, it's okay, you can restart. And I would just ignore them and keep going. But when it happened afterwards, the judges would always be like, there is this moment on their face where they go, oh, wow, she fooled me. I'm going to really pay attention to the rest of this speech. And it was always super effective if I went middle of the round, which is kind of like in a sales cycle. If you're, one of 6 vendors and you're like the 5th or the fourth vendor that they've evaluated that week, they're probably not going to remember you. So if you can really stand out in that front half, you will be remembered. That was a rule that my coach and I like intentionally worked on breaking so that it would kind of throw the audience for a loop.
Yeah, I was always of the belief that I'd rather go first or last. Those are the 2 best rounds. It's like if you go first and you set the bar really high, everyone's like, well, no one's going to be able to beat that, Yeah. But if you end the round super strong, you're the last thing they remembered. And they're like, oh, that was cool when she pretended like she forgot, but she was actually messing with us. And yeah, this is actually, I talk about how sales actually has a lot of similarities with board game design. So are you a board game player at all, Sarah?
I dabble. I've got friends who are obsessed and I used to live with them. So we would have like board game nights. So yeah, I like board games.
So a board game designer explained to me once that the way you create a board game is you create a very, 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 very strict set of rules. And then one by one, you allow the players to break them. So it's like, okay, you roll the dice and you move that many spaces forward. Roll a 6, you move forward. Unless you roll a 3, in which case you can move forwards or backwards. That's the rule. And I think about that in sales a lot. Sometimes I will intentionally violate a rule spectacularly. Lavender is the email tool that everybody on LinkedIn uses. And they're very big on like 5 words maximum in your subject line. If I wanted to break that rule, I would do an incredibly long subject line that's far longer than you expect. But I'd adhere to the other 12 rules of like solid email writing, right? Where it's like 100%. This one thing is so standing out, it's going to grab your attention. And we are an animal that evolved by recognizing patterns, So we were designed to be the animal that when you see the single red berry in the bush, you can spot it and you can pick it out. And that's how we survived. I feel like you got to pull the same trick when you're in a competitive environment, and sales is a competitive environment. If you've got 10 people all following the exact same pattern and you're the one that sticks out deliberately, but you still act like you're supposed to be in the inbox. You're still adhering to all the rest of the norms. That's my philosophy on how to stand out.
I love it. I love it so much. We were talking about like things you learned in speech. One of the things that I was thinking outside of like following rules and breaking them was just like learning from speech how to like write a persuasive speech and the format. And now I apply that format to basically all of the decks that I prepare.
Ooh, well,
and I just do a visual, persuasive speech.
We're actually going to get to that in the second half of the show. We're going to make this actionable for the audience. But before we do that, Sarah Brazier, do you want to do Gimme Gimme?
Yeah, let's do Gimme Gimme.
Let's do Gimme Gimme. Okay. So if anybody is unfamiliar with this show, we very much like to correct misinformation on this show. You see, there's a nasty bit of false information that's been going around the internet that says that LinkedIn is for friendship, right? It's to have a nice time, to entertain yourself, to make friends, and selflessly never ask for anything in return. But here at Chris Sells His Soul, we understand what the real reason for LinkedIn is, right? LinkedIn is the only social media network that was designed so people could make money. It was designed for you to upload your resume so you could get a better high-paying job. It was designed for you to get higher-paying clients, to get hired at higher-paying roles. And every once in a while, we like to take a moment. I like to get into character, and we like to ask my audience for exactly what it is we want from them. So, Sarah Brazier, you ready to do this?
I'm ready to do this.
All right. Hello, this is Boss Bogue. Welcome to another episode of Gimme Gimme, the part of the show where I ask you for money. Today's show is brought to you by Flying Cat Marketing. That's right, I see all you B2B SaaS companies out there scaling too quickly. Well, it's going to come back and bite you in the ass, right? I know you don't like hearing this, but just because you can run ChatGPT for something doesn't mean you understand what the hell you're doing, all right? If you want to go and scale into European markets, you got to do it right. All right, so Flying Cat is an international SEO and content agency. They've got a women-led company, women-led team with 90% women from 15 different countries. You know, women, those people that drive 70% of purchasing decisions. Yeah, pretty important market to understand, right? With a full demand gen and demand capture approach, Flying Cat helps you reduce customer acquisition costs through organic marketing. They have a team of native language strategists and content creators from all over the world who can help you untap your organic potential in the US, UK, Canada, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Brazil, and Germany. All right, their goal is to increase your organic search conversion rates by 50% in 90 days. All right, so they're offering to listeners of this show a free consultation if you scan the QR code on your screen right now. So go ahead, scan that QR code. Learn how to do local SEO the right way in the countries that you want to scale into. Check out Flying Cat today. And now's your chance, Sarah Brazier. You've got my audience here. They're on LinkedIn. They have money. What do you want to tell them to do?
I want to tell them to follow me on LinkedIn. And if you want some solid sales tips, I want you to go to my LinkedIn and click on the last post that I made. And if you scroll down, you can click the link to Second Body. And I made a course last year that's completely free. And it's literally just how to sell, selling 101. So the anatomy of a discovery call, setting up front contracts, getting next steps, do that. And you can hang out with me, Coach Sarah, and, we'll talk shop.
Yeah. Connect with Sarah Brazier, all right? All the LinkedIn influencers you see out there in their yacht parties, they're all just trying to be Sarah Brazier, right?
That's it.
She did it at a high level at Gong. She built up the audience. She has the record of sales success. People know her. People invite her to content houses. She's super cool, and she's giving away valuable knowledge for free. Go ahead, connect with her on LinkedIn. You maniacs. You are throwing your money and time away if you do not do this. Which, by the way, if you want a better way to throw your time and money away, why don't you buy my course, The Complete Guide to Selling on Video? So, unlike Sarah, I actually charge for this course because I spent way too much time making it. All right? You think that Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie not being nominated for an Oscar is the crime of the last year? I didn't get nominated for an Oscar for this thing, okay? And you have no idea how much time I put into shooting and editing it so it is immersive and fun and actionable and funny. It's full of original sketch comedy that you're not going to get anywhere else. We're going to be watching an infomercial for The Complete Guide in just a moment. But before we do, Sarah, do you have anything more to ask my audience before we go to our next segment?
Absolutely not.
All
Go
right.
buy Chris's course.
Go buy it. This has been Gimme Gimme. Iggy, roll the tape.
Hello? Is this Mr. Sherber? It sure is. What can I help you with, brother?
Hello. You were not expecting this call. Do you have 17 seconds to learn
Hang on a
about
second.
Mercifully Short?
Is this a cold call?
I don't know.
You. Never call this number again.
Oh no! Another unsuccessful cold call. You probably don't have time to fuck off.
I got a quota to hit.
Are you spending hours every week cold calling and cold emailing but not seeing results?
There's gotta be a better way.
Introducing the complete guide to selling on video. Whether you're new to sales or a President's Club member, this fast and fun course will teach you to efficiently create short, customized videos that get results. The complete guide to selling on video is not sold in stores. Visit chrisbogue.io and use promo code GIMMEGIMME to take $50 off while supplies last. Don't delay. Get noticed today.
And we're back.
We're back.
I am here with Sarah Brazier, talking about persuasive speaking, competitive speaking. And before we jumped to our middle segment, Sarah was teasing a method that she has that she uses in all her sales presentations that served her well as a competitive speech team member. So Sarah, take us through it.
Yeah, sure. So persuasive speaking follows a really simple format. It goes introduction, problem, cause, solution, conclusion. And I follow that format for everything that I do when I create a business case or when I'm creating an opening deck for my audience. And so most introductions start with a example. So this is where you pull like your use case for, this company, if you're selling to a specific company, find a competitor of theirs who uses your product, or find someone who looks like them. And you start with an intro around, so-and-so had this problem, and it's very similar to what you're experiencing. And then you lay out what the problem is. And typically the problem is manifesting in multiple different ways that you've learned in discovery. So you can say, what I've heard from you is the problem is A, B, and C. And usually if you do threes, there's a magic rule of threes. Those are great. And then you can go into the causes. And I think a lot of people skip this when they are building out decks or thinking about articulating the value of your solution. They go problem, solution instead of problem, cause, solution. So if you talk about the root causes of why are you experiencing all of these issues? So when I sold Gong, some of the issues that we found were slow onboarding time. Or an issue that we would find is that reps were not adopting new messaging for a strategic initiative. So they weren't selling as much as they should be of a new product, or sales cycles were longer than they should be. And so then you go and talk about the root causes. Why is that happening? Sometimes your customers knows the answer and they told you a little bit about it in the discovery. And sometimes there are things that you as an expert selling whatever you're selling have seen again and again and again from your customers, as well as you've probably done a lot more research on these problems than they have because you're obsessed with them. So you go problem, cause, and then solution. And that's when you can actually present your product and the features that will solve the problems that they're having. But because you can tie it back to the root cause of their challenges, you're much more likely to build a better argument for why they should go forward with your solution versus a competitor. It is very much going into the idea of, I understand your world and I can articulate your problems better than you can. So I try to use that as much as possible. Even when I'm running a demo, I think problem, cause, solution when I go in and show a specific feature set. Before I even talk about what's on the screen, I talk about what they were experiencing, why that's happening, and then I introduce how to solve the problem within the demo. Mm-hmm. Did you ever do persuasive speaking, Chris?
No, that's not a category in the high school circuit that I was in. And then I guess I did a little bit of like impromptu speaking, but that's a different thing. But yeah,
but impromptu follows some of that same methodology of you agree with the quote or you disagree with the quote, and then you give supporting evidence.
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting framework, and it's also something like I always say. So, like, I coach a lot of people on how to, put themselves out there, and I do a lot of my business on LinkedIn. A lot of the people I work with have no experience with LinkedIn at all, and they treat it like it's transactional, like it's an email, And I'm like, hey, this is a social media platform. here. And you can get in trouble if you are talking out your ass all the time about things that you don't know about. And I even like out here, like I don't pretend to know about everything. I always say I'm a guy who's interested in the problem. You know, I'm always talking about the problem. I'm always asking my audience for feedback on the problem, what they think is driving it, what they think the solutions are. And yeah, it's interesting to me because, again, in speech, you don't know exactly who well, I guess the more you do speech, the more you know who your audience is. And I know those college kids, and we can even get more into the politics of speech, but I know sometimes when you're getting to the collegiate level and you're getting super into nationals, you literally know down to the judge who you're trying to persuade. And you know, you've got a good idea of who has pull in the judges room because the judges talk to each other and there's buzz throughout the people, you know, who are evaluating you. And yeah, in sales, you're sometimes selling to wildly different personality types. And I find it's interesting that you talk so much about the causes of the problem. Do you ever have like alternate decks prepared where they have different causes or different, like, you know, you use a different deck or a different line of storytelling depending on what kind of person is sitting on the other end of that meeting?
Yes, and that's why the discovery is so important. But at Gong, we would try to figure out like what's the biggest problem that they need to solve right now that's going to have the highest revenue impact. And so we had like 3 different decks that were that you could use to sort of articulate that. I think eventually we had like 5 different decks. But yes, I would do that. And then I would build out my decks as time went by based off of the industry that I was selling to, or when I would do business cases, it would be completely tailored to that specific account, because by that point in time, I had gotten so into the weeds. And I usually run a pilot with them so I could look at their data and actually look at what their reps were talking about on the phone and go, I'm seeing some interesting stuff here in the data. Let me tell you about what I'm seeing and why, based on my experience, I think this could be happening. And some ideas for how you can solve this problem. And you could solve a lot of the problems without Gong, but if you took Gong away, then you would be blind to the problems and you'd be blind to the changes you were making and blind to the impact. So you could, but you couldn't solve it with Gong, without Gong.
That's interesting though, that you guys had a model where you were able to collect conversational data from them as part of like your fuel for selling them the solution. For me, it's interesting because now that I've been doing the coaching and consulting thing for a few years, I work with all sorts of different companies selling all sorts of different things. My last time I was on like an actual sales team, I was selling education technology. And I found it was very interesting. A lot of the battle was figuring out, am I talking to somebody who blames the students or do they blame themselves? Like, does this person see the world as these kids are not doing enough and they need to step it up and do better? Or are they saying, I'm not doing enough, I need to step it up and do better? It was 2 wildly different ways to approach them. But first I had to know who I was in the room with, you know? It's like, is this somebody who's trying to do more, or is this someone who's trying to do less and expects somebody else to do more? Yeah. And until I understood how they viewed the problem, I wouldn't know how to actually make a persuasive case to them.
Yeah, and it's the problem that, you know, person A told me, this person B see it to be as detrimental to the success of the business as person A. So you always have to kind of like rerun that discovery piece to figure out, okay, this is where we're at. You actually don't care about solving for X, but you care about solving for Y, and I can solve for both. So let's just focus our time on Y.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing too. And, you know, we can get deeper into this, but one thing I learned as an improviser is that the audience often doesn't know what it is they want, or they think they want one thing, but they actually don't. I would say if improv audiences actually knew what they wanted, or if you actually gave an improv audience what they thought they wanted, it would be nothing but men pretending to have sex with each other the entire show. That's the first thing they do, is they're like, have sex with each other. And it's like, that's actually not funny. Actually, if we were up here just doing that for 30 minutes, it would be very boring and very uncomfortable, you know? So we're going to create a story with characters with real motivations and real relationships. And if it goes to sex, fine, you know, but if you just give them that thing that they want, it's not going to happen. And I find the sin that B2B tech buyers fall into, or I don't know, you can actually weigh in on this if you think this is more the sellers or the buyers pushing this narrative, that everybody just wants to save time. I was talking with this, I had MJ Smith on the show last episode, when we were talking about this phenomenon of how the more successful a company becomes, the more all marketing becomes the same. And everybody talks about how they want to save time. I'm like, actually, if you have like a 7-figure deal jump into the pipeline and they inbound and they're like, oh, we don't need to see a demo. You know, we can just implement on it. It's like, no, you're going to pull out all the stops to give them a demo and set them up with the system. You're going to follow all the steps because they're very valuable to you. When something's important to you, you're actually willing to spend time on it. But yeah, do you find that buyers genuinely know what they want? Do you find sometimes they're mistaken about the problems and solutions, or like, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, well, it depends. Because I sold to salespeople, they tend to be a little more, they know what it's like being in my shoes, and they know what it's like dealing with buyers. So a lot of times they can be easier to play with, but sometimes not in a discovery call. Occasionally you'll get someone who comes in and they have a really specific feature that they want. And you go, well, why do you want that? And they start talking about it, and you're like, oh, well, why is that the feature that's going to solve that problem? And they don't actually know why, but they got something stuck in their head that if this feature exists, then they're going to be able to solve all of these problems with it. But when you back them up and go, hey, let's actually look at like why these issues are manifesting, you don't really need, I don't know, some widget that can timestamp your calls. That's like not as important as actually being able to see what people are really talking about and having very, very accurate analysis of what people discuss versus a timestamp. Like those two things have like way different value. And so sometimes you kind of have to pivot, or you have to like help them zoom out and help them see the forest for the trees. I do get that sometimes, but it really depends on the buyer. It really depends. And it depends on how high up the food chain they are. Are you talking to the CEO, or are you talking to the manager? And I think a good salesperson can pivot and sell to both, because most companies buy by consensus, and there's, you know, up to eight plus decision makers on an enterprise deal, and all of them care about different things.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the actual performance, right?
Sure.
So people might think it's different to do like a high school speech competition versus an executive level meeting for enterprise sales. But these are still just human beings. And human beings, it's funny because I throw a lot of crazy stuff out there on LinkedIn. And, you know, a reaction that I get from people is oftentimes they'll look at my comedy or whatever, and they'll be like, I could never put something like this out there because I sell to serious people. You know, I have serious buyers with serious job titles making serious money. And I've actually discovered that sometimes your hoity-toity, you know, buttoned up professional person with a lot of money, they are the ones who laugh the hardest at absurdity or crudeness or blue humor. So So that's one category, is like, are you funny? Sometimes humor wins out. Most salespeople are quick with a joke. I find you get a lot of very quick-witted people, very kind of affable people in sales. And then there's also this end of it that's vulnerability. Your ability to be vulnerable, your ability to be relatable, to connect with your buyers on a human level. And what are your thoughts on kind of the trifecta of like professionalism versus relatability? I guess it's two things. I guess on the one end you have like professionalism, and on the other end you have vulnerability and relatability. What does that mean to you as a performer, and how important are each of those, if you want to take them one by one?
Yeah, so I think both are very important, and you can be the consummate professional and not be relatable at all, and you'll lose the deal because you haven't been able to develop a connection with your buyer, and people buy from people like them, which is both disheartening and comforting. But you know, there are more people that are like you probably than than not, so that's good. So I think to me, like, professionalism is taking the problem seriously that they're having, that the customer is having, taking the customer's feelings seriously, and meeting them where they're at, which means you're not going to push them too hard to buy. You are going to offer suggestions and timelines and try to control the sales cycle and try to motivate movement. But if they come to you and they say, like, look, we're just not ready, it's respecting that. And a lot of times I find like newer sales reps get pressured from management to pressure their buyer into making purchases, and they push too hard, and then you end up alienating someone, and then you'll never win that person's business. So you've got to be able to feel it out, and that's where relatability comes in, and just having empathy and being able to look at someone and understand, is this hesitancy coming because they're just not a very decisive person, or is the hesitancy coming because we don't have enough buy-in from other people on the team, and just being able to like figure those things out. So like if I'm in a room, honestly, I felt more nervous doing speech and debate than I've ever felt on a sales call.
Yeah.
So yeah. Because like in speech, if you say or you stumble once, then you could lose the round depending on who's your judge. And in a boardroom, I can and I can stumble, and I can go, oh, I skipped a slide, let me go back one, and no one cares.
Yeah. But the rest is
ahead.
polished, is it not?
Yeah, the rest is polished. I mean, you like your argument's polished, your ability to answer questions is polished. You usually have someone else in the room with you who can add different perspectives. Like all the work that you're doing, all the multi-threading, all the engagement, all of the relationship building you've done before you even get into that meeting. My objective is, before I ever sit down in a room full of people who are going to watch a demo together, is that I've talked to all of them individually, and I've run a mini discovery call with all of them. And so they know me and I know them. So it's just all a bunch of friends sitting down. And then I can even call them out and say, oh, Chris, by the way, you mentioned this when we met last week, but this I specifically wanted to point out for you. That's like both professionalism and relatability, because I did the work to do the research and know what you care about, and I'm able to call it out in front of a room, and it can speak to you and it can speak to everybody else. And they go, oh, wow, if this is my experience with Sarah, if she's done all this work and she knows me so well, think about what our post-sale cycle is going to be like. Think about how she's really taking the time to figure out what we need. And she's tailoring this presentation to us. So I think you should be able to speak well and articulate yourself well. And the words you pick are very important. But if you stumble once in a while, that's not a big deal, because people are people and everybody stumbles.
Yeah, I don't know. I get, and we can dig a little bit more into like LinkedIn content here too, because you and I, and if anyone at home did not watch this, or if you're listening to the audio version of this, Sarah and I had some fun this week. We put on a little 2-person skit where we were doing a fake
duo.
speech, a fake duo intro. And I was talking about storytelling techniques that went over any audience, and Sarah quips, like dumping your trauma on the audience. And we laughed it off and we go, no, but seriously, like, yeah, kind of. I see this a lot online. I see sales influencers talking about, I guess the most low stakes version of this is like imposter syndrome. You see that word thrown out a lot out on LinkedIn. Some people share way more on LinkedIn than I am comfortable sharing. They're not doing this for no reason, though. You, as somebody who is a speech performer, I'm sure we're in rounds where people did share very, very, very personal things and were rewarded for it. Oftentimes, kind of these emotions or these things that nobody else is really willing to say, or these things that people keep private to them, you can get serious points from an audience by disclosing that. And there's ways to do that in sales too. But again, I think this may be an ethically questionable line for some people. So where do you view vulnerability in terms of its role as a performer, either in speech or in content creation or in sales? And is there a line that you are conscious of not to cross?
Yeah, I think there are things that I can share with a close group of friends or my family that I'm never gonna put on the internet, because a stranger doesn't need to know that about me. And I am wary of using LinkedIn likes as like temporary therapeutic relief from actually dealing with challenges I might have. And I sometimes see, I think you used this when we were talking on the phone, I sometimes see posts that feel a little bit like a cry for help, and not a lot of it like they're taking the time to actually process and deal with something hard and heavy. And I think it's okay to, this is what motivates me. But even though it's a joke, gimme LinkedIn, it's true. Like, LinkedIn is a space for people to be professionals and to sell to each other and to professionally network. And I firmly believe that everyone has the right to free speech, and you can say whatever you want on the internet, but just know that if you say it, the internet's forever, just like a tattoo. And maybe you feel good about saying it that one time in that one moment emotionally, but you might come back to it a couple years later and go, wow, I wish I never said that. That was really personal. And now everybody knows about that. And it's forever. And maybe it jeopardized me getting a job. So that's what I think. I think, just there are some limitations, and you should ask yourself, in 5 years from now, would I bury my face in my pillow and go, oh God, no, why did I say that?
My feeling about vulnerability is like, I always tell like my clients, I'm like, when it comes to storytelling, not everything has to be either the greatest of all time or a huge, like, debilitating tragedy. And I feel like LinkedIn content tends to swing wildly back and forth between those two extremes. Either it's like, I used to be poor, but now I'm so rich. Look at me. I got this job from blah, 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 blah. Or it's like, the crying CEO, like, in tears about, how they feel so empty and dead inside. And I'm like, hey, actually, the fun thing about comedy is there's a million emotions in between that. And if you really lock into one of those more subtle emotions as a storyteller, people will get you. And one thing that I always did anytime I was back when I was like cold calling, I did this all the time, is I would talk about food. That was like my little sneaky trick. I would tell somebody, I would be like, because I'd do the standard cold call where I'm like, oh, how have you been? You know, you ask that question to get them talking. And if somebody was like, "Oh, I've been fine. How about you?" I'd be like, you know, someone left pie in the break room and I'm trying not to eat it. That's how my morning's going. I don't know. I actually, could I ask you a question, Sarah? Would you mind if I let you know why I was calling? And it's like letting them know about like the tempting piece of food in the break room that I was trying not to eat. To me, that's a form of vulnerability. You know,
yes, it's also very relatable because everybody's experienced that, but it's not taking a tragedy existing in your life and using that for sympathy points to get the person to stay on the phone with you. It's not an overshare.
It's not nearly as dramatic.
Yeah.
You know, but at the same time, there is this real struggle. And it's like, if you get somebody on the phone, maybe I'm talking to somebody who's also trying to watch their weight and they're like, oh my God, I've been trying to do this diet this month too. Yeah, I know, hard, you know, maybe I'm talking to a health nut. Maybe I'm talking to somebody who's like super fit and they're like, good for you, man. Yeah, you can do it. You know, I've just told them a little story where without them realizing they're kind of on my side now, you know, but it's about something that's not.
I used to work with students with this when I was coaching them, and I'd say we've got to earn the right. Because when you coach a dramatic interpretation, usually it's sad, like something terrible has happened, and that person is going to get to the climax where they're going to have this big reveal of someone dying in their family or something really bad happening to them or them witnessing this horrible traumatic thing. But when you're having a real life conversation with someone who's carrying a burden, before they get down to that breaking point where they're sobbing, there's all of these little tiny moments where we watch the glass begin to fracture. And then we've done all of this work to bring the audience in to get them to believe us that when we have a big reveal, it actually means something. But a lot of times when you're coaching early stage speech kids, they'll want to be crying immediately and yell the whole way through, and you watch 10 minutes of this, and it's not fun. No. So instead, let's reel it in. Instead, why don't we use humor and have them tell a joke and let them laugh and let the pause after the laugh hang just a little too long so you know that they've got something sad happening. So it's like, yeah, and then, you know, I didn't eat the pie. So anyway, how do you feel about pie, Chris?
Yeah, well, and it's like, so, yeah, that's you know, it's the whole acting challenge of like, people who are crying are usually trying to stop crying.
Yeah,
you know, people who are drunk are trying to act sober. They're trying to convince you that they're sober, and it's like, yeah, you kind of have to be. And I guess it comes with maturity too. Like, you have to understand what it's like to cry for attention, and then you have to understand what it's like to try to not call attention to yourself when you're crying. Only then can you get up in front of 200 people with all the attention on you and realistically cry in front of an audience.
Yeah. And I think what happens when you see a trauma post on LinkedIn or any form of social media is it's jumping straight to the climax with none of the context.
Yes.
And so it feels off and it feels wrong. That shouldn't take away from what that person who's actually writing that thing is experiencing, because they could be posting it for a really genuine reason, but they're posting it for them. They're not thinking about the audience's reaction. And when you're the audience member who's reading the post online, you go, what? And so you always, anytime, like, to me, like, one of the rules of thumb that I have is when I read a post out loud, number one, I want to see if I laugh at it myself. And number two, I think, if I post this, is the audience going to get where I'm coming from? Are they going to, like, is it going to be an enjoyable, educational learning experience for them? Or are they just going to be like, what?
Yeah. Well, the way I say it is, I'm like, the audience is not your therapist.
No.
And you can use vulnerability to connect, but the show is for them. The show is not for them to feel sorry for you. Everything you do is in service for the audience, you know? So, gosh, we could go on this forever, Sarah, but unfortunately, we're out of time today.
We're out of time.
So real quick here at the end of the episode, if anybody wants more of Sarah Brazier's thoughts, if they want to learn about your training, or just maybe become friends with you professionally the way we do on LinkedIn, where should they go to find you?
On my LinkedIn. They can just find me on LinkedIn. That's it. I think one day I'll have a website. My husband bought me like a domain, but I've done zero with it. So LinkedIn for now.
Yeah, get that. Go check it out. Anybody, if you are a fan of me, if you run your own business or if you run a sales or marketing team and you want to get more video content out there to drive revenue for your company, you should chat with me. So Chris Bogue, you can go ahead, scan the QR code there. I do training, I do individual coaching, I do team training. I also do custom content creation and video strategy. So you can book time with me. And of course, thank you again to today's wonderful sponsor, Flying Cat. Don't scale to Europe alone. Get actual marketers who know how to create a localized organic marketing campaign in the language of the people that you speak, people who understand those kinds of subtleties. If you want a free consultation with marketing, go ahead, scan the QR code, and you can find previous episodes of Chris Sells His Soul wherever you get podcasts. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, I'm everywhere. Go check out previous episodes there. This has been today's show. Sarah Brazier, say bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.